is supposed to be a handicap, but Tranest is also one of the wealthiest individual worlds in the hub. Trigger watched the woman with some interest as the party moved along a dim corridor, followed by the viewer's circuit's invisible pickup. Lyad Ermetyne didn't look more than a few years older than she was herself. Rather small, slender, with delicately pretty features. She wore something ankle-length and long-sleeved in a lusterless gray with an odd, smoky quality to it. "Isn't she the Empress of Tranest or something of the sort?" Trigger asked. Quillen shook his head. "They've no emperors there, technically, since they had to sign their treaty with the Federation. She just owns the planet, that's all." "What would she be doing, going to Manon?" "I'd like to know," Quillen said. "The Ermetyne's a lady of many interests. Now, see the plump elderly man just behind her?" "The ugly one with the big head who sort of keeps blinking?" "That one. He's Belchik Pluly and—" "Pluly?" Trigger interrupted. "The Pluly lines?" "Yes. Why?" "Oh, nothing really. I heard a friend of mine. Pluly's got a yacht out in the Manon system. And a daughter." Quillen nodded. "Nelauk." "How did you know?" "I've met her. Quite a girl, that Nelauk. Only child of Pluly's old age, and he dotes on her. Anyway, he's been on the verge of being blacklisted by Grand Commerce off and on through the past 3 decades. But nobody's ever been able to pin anything more culpable on him than that he keeps skimming extremely close to the limits of a large number of laws." "He's very rich, I imagine," Trigger said thoughtfully. "Very. He'd be much richer even if it weren't for his hobby." "What's that?" "Harems. The Pluly harems rate among the most intriguing and best educated in the hub." Trigger looked at Pluly again. "Ugh," she said faintly. Quillen laughed. "The Pluly salaries are correspondingly high. Viewer's dropping the group now, so there's just one more I'd like you to notice. The tall girl with black hair, in orange." Trigger nodded. "Yes, I see her. She's beautiful." "So she is. She's also Space Scout Intelligence. Gaya. Comes from Farnhart, where they use the single name system. A noted horsewoman, very wealthy, socially established, which is why we like to use her in situations like this." Trigger was silent a moment. Then she said, "What kind of situation is it? I mean, what's she doing with Lyad Ermetyne and the others?" "She probably attached herself to the group as soon as she discovered Lyad had come on board. Which," Quillen said, "is exactly what I would have told Gaya to do if I'd spotted Lyad first." Trigger was silent a little longer this time. "Were you thinking this Lyad could be—" "One of our suspects? Well," said Quillen judiciously, "let's say Lyad has all the basic qualifications. Since she's come on board, we'd better consider her. When something's going on that looks more than usually tricky, Lyad is always worth considering. And there's one point that looks even more interesting to me now than it did at first." "What's that?" "Those 2 little old ladies I eased out of their rightful cabin." Trigger looked at him. "What about them?" "This about them. The Askab of Elfkund is, you might say, one of the branch managers of the Ermetyne interests in the hub. He is also a hardworking heel in his own right. But he's not the right size to be one of the people we're thinking about. Lyad is. He might have been doing a job for her." "Job?" she asked. She laughed. "Not with those odd little grannies?" "We know the odd little grannies. They're the Askab's poisoners and pretty slick at it. They were sizing you up while you were having that little chat, doll. Probably not for a coffin this time. You were just getting the equivalent of a pretty thorough medical checkup. Presumably, though, for some sinister ultimate purpose." "How do you know?" Trigger asked, very uncomfortably. "One of those little suitcases in their cabin was a diagnostic recorder. It would have been standing fairly close to the door while you were there. If they didn't take your recordings out before I got there, they're still inside. They're being watched, and they know it. It seemed like a good idea to keep the Askab fairly nervous until we found out whether those sweethearts of his had been parked next door to you on purpose." "Apparently they were," Trigger admitted. "Nice bunch of people." Oh, they're not all bad. Lyad has her points, and old Belchek, for example, isn't really a heel. He just had no ethics or morals and revolting habits. Anyway, all this brings up the matter of what we should do with you now. Trigger set her glass down on the table. Refill? Quillen inquired. He reached for the ice crystal pitcher between them. No, she said. I just want to make a statement. State away. He refilled his own glass. For some reason, said Trigger, I've been acting lately, the last 2 days, in a remarkably stupid manner. Quillen choked. He set his glass down hastily, reached over and patted her hand. Doll, he said, touched. It's come to you, at last. She scowled at him. I don't usually act that way. That, said Quillen, was what had me so baffled. According to the Commissioner and others, you're as bright in the head as a diamond usually, and frankly... I know it, Trigger said dangerously. Don't rub it in. I apologize, said Quillen. He patted her other hand. At any rate, Trigger said, drawing her hands back, now that I've realized it, I'm going to make up for it. From here on out, I'll cooperate. To the hilt? She nodded. To the hilt, whatever that is. You can't imagine, said Quillen, how much that relieves me. He filled her glass, giving her a relieved look. I had definite instructions, of course, not to do anything like grabbing you by the back of the neck, flinging you into a rest cubicle and sitting on it, guns drawn, till we'd berthed in the Precol port. But I was tempted, I can tell you. He paused and thought. You know, he began again, that really would be the best. No, Trigger said indignantly. When I said cooperate, I meant actively. Mihul said I'm considered one of the gang in this project. From now on, I'll behave like one. And I'll also expect to be treated like one. Said Quillen. Well, there is something you can do, all right. What's that? Go on display here, now. What for? She asked. As bait, you sweet ninny. If the boss grabber is on this ship, we should draw a new nibble from him. He appraised the green dress in the mirror again. His expression grew absent. It might be best, Trigger suspected a trifle uneasily, to keep Major Quillen's thoughts turned away from things like nibbling. All right, she said briskly, let's do that. But you'll have to brief me. End of chapter 12.